how do we understand the severity of a crime if it was done by a man or by a woman.
I love the Jenny Holzer quote, abuse of power comes as no surprise.
Clean water, snap of the fingers.
It's actually real.
By which are you referring to the physical, biological differences between men and women?
Welcome to this week's episode of Ways of Seeing. This week I'm going to be talking to Phoebe Minson. We first met about 2 years ago. Since then, she's been a very close ally in the art world. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I hope this is the start of many more.
I work for an amazing organisation called Shift, who are a national systems change organisation working with some of the most vulnerable children in the country in 8 different local authorities, really spread out, really diverse, so some very rural, some very inner city, and working in a really intensive way with children who are caught up in cycles of crime. Now, I don't do the incredible work of working with those children and families. I do the slightly behind the scenes work of external affairs and communications, which also kind of bleeds into policy, as well as thinking about funding, which brings me into spaces with philanthropists. So I'm kind of across that space, and that's my day job.
What is it that brought you to that? Because when I first interacted with you, it took me a while to really understand the depth of what that means for you.
Yeah, I went to Central St Martin's. I did my fine art degree. I was there for 5 years. And while I was doing that, and prior to doing that, I'd been working in all kinds of places that were overtly art centric and places that were covertly art centric, because I definitely believe that art, well, at least wherever I am, art is at the center and creativity is at the center. And it was while I was working in a very overtly art centric place, which was a gallery, I was working in a commercial gallery, that I guess my sense of my sense of equality and equity, and what I wanted that to look like, or what I thought it should look like, and sort of becoming disillusioned by the reality of some of the commercial art world practices, which it was a kind of a slow burn from the age of about 16 when I came into it to the age of 21, 22. At 21, 22, I had an opportunity to leave that space and to, I guess, step out on my own. I'd built up some pretty solid networks. I'd done a lot of freelancing. I'd done a lot of work with other people. And I had begun working in this consultancy capacity. And coaching as well. And so, yeah, I sort of struck out on my own. And after a couple of months, realized it was pretty lonely for an extrovert such as myself to be waking up every day and kind of thinking, yeah, just having to do all of the stuff in my own head, and not being part of a team. I love being part of a team. I love what that teaches you. I love the discipline and the rigor that is involved in teamwork. I love that it takes me out of myself and puts me into the minds and the shoes of other people. I think that's a really good thing. And I was also so aware that I was 21, 22, and if I ever wanted to lead in the future in any kind of capacity, I needed to be led, and I needed to be led really well to learn that skill. And that wasn't going to happen if I just did things on my own. So I wanted to be part of a bigger structure. I wanted to be part of something that had governance and boards and reporting and papers and finances, so that I could learn all of those skills. At the same time, I knew that I didn't want to be in the commercial space. I knew that I wanted to be thinking about accessibility, about public interaction with art. And so I was applying to lots of public institutions. There were no jobs. There were 0 jobs. I was like cold applying for jobs that did not exist. And around this time, my mum, who was a family and criminal barrister, and now an academic, was aware of this amazing organization called Shift. She saw them advertising for this external affairs role, and she messaged me and she just said, it integrates so many of the things that you're really passionate about, and it will give you a space to work within a structure that is innovating and a structure that is moving very quickly. It's very ambitious, it's scaling fast, but it's also not a corporate commercial startup where, it's like, ethics? Whose ethics? Let's just make as much money as we can, because it's a charity. So it's totally different. And that was something I hadn't experienced before. So I've been there now for 2.5 years, and I love it. I learn, oh my goodness, so much. And I have learned so much. I mean, firstly, I had to understand the entire youth justice system and children care setup in this country, understand the legislation and the policy around it all. And so I kind of spend my weeks can be quite a lot of whiplash, because I'll go from, well, I don't really go to many gallery openings anymore, but I'll go from coaching, or I'll come to, I'll be hanging out in a studio, I'll be with you, I'll be with another artist or another creative, or I'll be writing, I'll have my head down, reading and writing about things to do very overtly with art. And then the next minute I'm in Croydon at a quarterly governance board talking about crime statistics and hearing the Met Police tell me about a cuckooing project. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very whiplash, but I love that. And that is something that's really good for my brain.
Maybe it's worth us talking about crime and gender roles within crime
Mm-hmm.
before we step into art. But do you
Yeah, let's do
find that
it.
there are gender biases within it,
Sure.
within the people that you interact with? Do you see
Well, I mean, within
a system that has biases towards male or females in any direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really think there's no part of this world that doesn't have traces, at the very least, or is saturated at the very most with gender biases and binaries. Within the criminal justice system, it's really well documented. I mean, there's just so much research that people can go and find that is about gender biases in terms of sentencing. What does sentencing look like for women versus men? How do we understand the severity of a crime if it was done by a man or by a woman, and if the victim was a man or a woman? And there's, examples that lots of people will recognize. For example, sexual assault and sexual abuse. We know that the vast majority of victims are women, and we also know that when the victim is a man, huge amount of bias plays into the reporting, the investigating, and the sentencing of those crimes as well. So there's kind of gender bias that affects everyone negatively when it comes to crime. I don't think it's about one gender getting off lightly and the other not. Actually, there is huge detriment to us sentencing through very binary lenses and not thinking about the individual, not thinking about context, and not looking at patterns as well as structural inequalities that go beyond gender. And we think about poverty and mental illness, physical illness, cycles of addiction or abuse. There's so many bigger things, but of course, gender sits within that, and it's incredibly prevalent.
Do you think do you think you can get to a point with a legal system or any system where it removes all those biases, or are they just there for a reason? Is that human subjective side of it something that is actually real?
By which are you referring to, like physical, biological differences between men and women? And so, therefore, we are reacting based on a like objective difference in the genders?
Maybe the example that I'm thinking of is when there's clearly a power relationship between
Mm-hmm.
certain groups, and they could be any groups, it could be gender groups and things like that, that there's going to be a natural bias towards understanding how crime happens between those two groups, or negative actions happen and positive.
Sure.
And I don't know how I don't know how you understand what the right amount of way of pricing that power is, in that if there is a power imbalance, there should be some bias, but then how do you balance it to the right amount?
Yeah. And I think you're right to bring it to power as a as a more overarching theme or an overarching thing, because one of the things that I've learned through my job is about systemic theory, which is a theory and practice used in predominantly in family psychotherapy. And that absolutely hinges on understanding and recognizing power and looking at the way that power exists in every single relationship and every single dynamic, and where it is negatively or positively or neutrally influencing the interactions. And so, can we ever extract power? Because really, that's the question. When you're talking about can we ever get to a place where gender bias doesn't exist in a space, or where we're not, what we're actually talking about is power. And we're talking about power related to gender for sure. And we're talking about power, and power is a, oh my gosh, like what a huge weight, what a huge magnetic force that exists. How can we, how do we quantify it? How do we contain it or understand it or quantify it. It's just so difficult. Yeah,
I
I
think it's
think,
impossible, right? I
yeah,
think really quantifying it is, and I kind of get to this. I don't have a balanced view on power. I think in every situation there is an imbalance. There's never equality, like water goes downhill.
right.
But I think there are different sources of power. I think in its most simple, male, female, if you just get the normal distribution of humans, there's a huge power imbalance in physicality. That's the reality. And then as soon as you kind of put in behind closed doors without access to resources, that power imbalance
Mm-hmm.
becomes the environment because
Mm-hmm.
a male generally can dominate a physical space and create systems of control with that power easily. But I think it's really interesting to see in certain situations where there are very strong sources of power for females. Like I grew up in a
Mm-hmm.
matriarchy. My mom was in charge, but I
Yeah,
also had a lot of negative influence from male figures in that because of the physicality and, aggression. As soon as something gets a little
sure.
bit scary, the power imbalance changes. But there are sources of power in both, and I just find it interesting trying to put that into a policy perspective because I think in art, generally over the last 10 years for me in London, we try and talk about this like level playing field, this like equality. And I'm not 100% if
Yeah.
that is like just this made up idea. It's
Yeah.
deceitful for me.
Well,
And
I
that
mean,
might be too
it's,
strong a view.
yeah. I mean, it's not made up, of course, but I'd say that it's, I mean, in some ways it's naive, in other ways maybe it's delusional. In some ways it's just unattainable, it's unrealistic. We don't have, yeah, we if we can't have equality in certain places, how on earth are we gonna spread it out to other places? We've not hacked it. We've not worked it out. And maybe we never will. And in fact, we probably never will because we're humans. We're really messy. We're really messy creatures. And we are all the time repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. We never seem to learn. And that is the kind of beauty and the pain of being human, is that we all go through the agonizing experience of figuring out this world. And some people try and just almost wing it, and other people will try and consume as much knowledge from the previous generations as they possibly can. And then what happens? It still repeats, or you inevitably miss something, or you have to experience it to learn through it. We can't just learn from reading Plato or whatever. We have to live it. We have to live it and learn it. And humans are messy. I mean, I come from a Christian standpoint as well, where I do believe that equality was intended, and equality, or the actual embodiment of equality, or the, what would be the word, the kind of the experience the experience of equality, what it would be like to actually to permeate every aspect of the earth's existence and production and reconstruction. The Christian belief is that that intention was thwarted, and it was always going to be thwarted because humans were given free will, and we were given these messy, complex brains that have urgent desires and seemingly high levels of forgetfulness. We do not learn from the things we ought to learn from. We might learn from the things we're not supposed to learn from, but it's so human, and there's something really beautiful in that. But I think, to your point on men and women and the biological aspects, I mean, we're seeing, you said, okay, so generally men are more physically dominant than women, men have more strength than women. A man in a room, from a physical perspective primarily, or only, or in isolation, holds the power. And again, context really matters. So one man in a room with 30 women, where that man is black and all those women are white, or where that man is young and all those women are old, if you start intersecting different characteristics on top of that, we can very quickly make that power a little bit less obvious. And that's where some of this conversation about the manosphere is so interesting, because we've actually got a whole bunch of young men who absolutely understand power to be a very binary, clean thing, where men have the power and women don't, and men hold the power by being physically bigger, physically more dominant, by maybe speaking more, having louder opinions, having more of the wealth, having more of the control of the assets in whatever way that looks. And that then creates an identity crisis. And I think as we push and pull gender and ideas of sex and sexuality around, we are pulling ideas of power around, and it is both liberating and exciting for some, and desperately scary and confusing and conflicting for others. Whichever way you're responding to it is entirely created and informed by your context, your past context and your present context. And that's then why the role of social media is so interesting, in the way that the algorithm can then amplify or silence aspects of context which might move the needle in your mind or might help you to make sense of it. And you're almost left constantly feeling further and further away from an idea of truth that feels comforting or comfortable.
Towards like a novel place, right?
Right.
I think back to like when I first reached out to you, and what you were just saying that sort of triggered that is I was in Miami. I've been there for a couple of years, and Miami is very much almost how we see social media manosphere now. You know, it's like, dude, make money, dude, get table. Girls, whether you're earning or not, guy will pay. Like there wasn't a single moment while I was in Miami where, and I had a really good relationship while I was there, where I didn't think that I was picking up the bill for the girls and the people around me. And that was sort of the mentality. And for an artist, that's like super tough mentality to kind of go around.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was coming back to London, I was looking over, I was like, you know, London has a much more liberal, egalitarian look on this. And I remember when we first met up, I think we met up in like a coffee shop or something like that. And there was a moment where I picked up the bill and I felt like I communicated something that wasn't quite right. There was like a little, not like a tussle, but it was almost like, no, I've communicated something else here by me picking up the bill, which obviously wasn't what I wanted to do. But in my head, I was like, obviously, Phoebe is just not me, is girl, I pay for things. And for about 6 months, that was like my mentality. I was like, why are people sort of flinching at this? And I noticed that there are certain aspects of that patriarchal, masculine-driven area that, in the context of the UK, are actually perceived as negative. And in my head, I was like, oh no, this is just culturally what I should be doing, because this is what I've sort of grown into. And part of why I reached out to you and to get advice was that I think you really understood the balance of those things. And even today, I find it difficult. And I have friends that say, hey, you don't have to pay for stuff, but I understand that communicates something different in different environments. But to summarize all of this, what I learned in that Miami culture, and what I do learn about what is the role of man, is that if there is this space where guys can earn more, and I think that's the reality of the game, it's easier for a guy to earn more doing the same job as a woman. And I'm not saying that that's right or not right, but that's the state of play. Then I also think if a guy can see that and benefit from that system, it's also right for him to pick up the tab and share that with his friends and host and drive that capital to other people. And I feel like that's something that's really cool in the value system. But I don't see that aspect of patriarchy being the thing that people like, you know, that's good, chivalry. I'm always going to open the door. My mom would kill me if I wasn't opening the door for people, or picking up the bill, or being kind, or like, hey, someone's mom's in trouble, like, be nice to them. Like, that's your job as a boy.
And I guess what's interesting is linking this idea of chivalry to agenda, because actually, you know, we should all be going out of our way to bless others with the blessings that we've been given, whatever that resource looks like, whether it's an able body to be able to go and help a neighbor clear their leaves, whether it's a little bit of extra money to be able to treat a friend to a coffee. You know, I had coffee with a friend the other day, and she got the coffees, And she said to me, "Oh my gosh, I just had a flashback to a time when I was so skint and there were tons of things I was missing out on. And the one thing that hurt the most was not being able to buy my mates a coffee because that just was so, it was something so small, but that was so ingrained in her of wanting to love and treat and care for the people around her and buy her mate a coffee." And I think when we when we put certain elements of human interaction or behavior, like really good stuff that's about being polite and kind and empathetic and compassionate and thinking outside of yourself and not being egocentric, when we tie that to a certain gender, when we say that women should be more patient and men should be more providing or whatever it is, we're limiting both genders, we're limiting all people, and we're also maybe not thinking about the root of what that is. We're not thinking about it as an act of humanity, and as an act of like human compassion.
Yeah, for sure. I think intentions really matter with this stuff. Because when I think about the distinction between chivalry and kindness, I think, yes, everyone should be kind. And
Right.
I think that's to baseline that. It's really easy to be kind in group. I think it's very hard to be kind out group. And I think that's where the tension in the world exists, is how do I be kind to someone that I define as not necessarily an enemy, but an other? And that othering,
an other.
like
sure.
the wider you kind of meet these people that are kind to everyone and they see humanity as this unified existence, and it's a beautiful idea, but that's not how most people have been embraced the world, because it's a very hard mentality to do. A little bit of unkindness can really change that in group out group. But what's the distinction between kindness and chivalry is, I think chivalry, if it doesn't have a gender norm, is using your position of power to over contribute to balance the books. It's a messy definition, but it's something like that. And I think when someone does assert that they have that power, sometimes that assertion triggers something in someone else.
Sure.
And I think, I don't know where that is, but I love the Jenny Holzer quote, like, abuse of power comes as no surprise. I think that nuance of communication, for me, that's where art lives. It's communicating complex things. I had someone ask me today, like, what's the similarity? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, like, what's the point? Why don't we talk about the real stuff? Because I think every artist has like all these interests, and those are what they're really interested in. And I don't know, you have technical artists, you have a craftsman artist that are just like really good at some medium. And then you have these people that are like, I really like, for me, it's geopolitics and power and control. And that's what I really love. The problem is, the thing that I'm kind of looking at and what I'm trying to communicate is nuanced and complex.
Right.
And that just means that the industry I've ended up in is art. But when I kind of look left and right, I see people like you or guys working at a hedge fund, and they're like, hey, we monetize it by placing bets on it. If I look at my lifestyle, I spend as much time on Polymarket as I do on canvases in the last few months. Like, art is what I do, but what I'm really interested in is how the world works. I think AI is something that we probably have a lot of disagreements on. I think you probably have a very different stance to me. And as an artist, I think I probably have a stance that every artist in the world is going to hate me on. And I write every single week religiously, and I'm a demon with this sort of stuff, and I don't have slop, but I do use AI every single day, and I think it's a force multiplier. But, just tell me why you think AI is bad and I'm a bad person, and I'll listen to your points. But
okay, I don't think nothing is all bad or all good. I don't think. I think that when we talk about AI, the use of AI, we aren't, as with everything, we're not nuanced enough to say what we're actually meaning when we talk about AI. Are we talking about large language models? Are we using about the AI that's built into Google, built into our phones? Are we talking about what I know you're talking about, which is essentially coding and creating AI powered, is that how you describe it? Little robot assistant that is entirely programmed to you, to your needs.
Part of what I've seen in Miami is
Mm.
that power. Like,
I
I
mean, I
think
think
if you
that's,
look at how
yeah, no,
Miami's run,
that's,
it's run through
yeah,
beauty.
yeah. And I think that, well, how is most of the world run through? It's run through aesthetics in some way. I think that's a really important piece of context. Your previous work in Miami and the work that you were doing in tech, in startups, how you were using technology and AI long before it became mainstream. And so your understanding of it, your understanding of the capabilities, your understanding of how to use it without it infiltrating the creative side of your brain, without it kind of damaging your critical thinking skills, are much more, they're very different. They're very different to what we're seeing happen in a mass way. And I guess, what's my opinion of AI? Well, I could say all the boring but important things around environment, around, what is the data that is being used to train it, and concerns around things like plagiarism and IP, and biases, racial bias, gender bias, all these things. There's loads of stats looking at how that stuff is showing up and how that's playing out. I think there is a vast difference between somebody using ChatGPT with basically, well, with no coding knowledge, with no understanding really of how it's working, to reply to their emails, to write their A-level English homework or whatever. That is one use of AI, and I think that use of AI is really problematic. People are going to become completely over reliant on a piece of technology which is so much more extreme than the internet. I mean, one of the arguments is like, oh, well, everyone freaked out when the internet was invented. Yeah, sure, but the internet provided some friction. The point of this is that it's frictionless, and that is not good for our brains. Like, we understand neurodevelopmentally that we require friction. We require that for neuroplasticity, for our brains to be healthy and to live longer. So I think that's one thing. But it's a completely different case or completely different situation where you have someone like you, where you are using it literally as an assistant. You are not offloading your own cognitive the tasks or your critical thinking. You're clearly doing all of that. You are reading, you are writing without the aid of AI, and you are using it like another person to do a completely different set of tasks to you, and tasks which I presume most of them you either know how to do, and so this isn't taking away your knowledge or preventing you from learning how to do it, or it's ones that you would actually outsource to somebody else. Now, that's obviously where the other dispute comes in about it taking people's jobs. And if you're always using an AI fueled something or other to do your taxes, to do your accounts, then what's going to happen to all the accountants? But I think I don't totally buy into the fear mongering of AI is going to steal all our jobs. I don't buy into that, and I also don't buy into some of the stuff around it reducing the quality of output in the creative arts, because I think we've seen enough kind of AI generated or AI contributed to art or creative output, which has not been it. And I think we've pretty quickly people have been like, okay, this is a pretty way of doing something that just does not have the gravitas or the importance or the whatever that it would do if it had been made by a human. I mean, I see it in lots of different places, and my partner's a music producer, so I see it infiltrating the music world, and that's fascinating. And it's fascinating to see and to hear from him how other people around him are starting to integrate it into their workflows. And again, you get that spectrum of people using it in a very like light admin kind of way, where it is speeding up efficiency and making, yeah, just kind of smoothing things out. It is removing friction, but in a way that is not removing friction of like your brain. But I find AI, it's complicated. It's really complicated. And, I'm not, it's not that I don't use it. I mean, I don't use it for anything generative. I would use it for things that, it's obviously built into all of my systems, as in it's all the things I use, my calendar, my messages, my emails. There is an AI component to all of these things. There's an AI component in Google, and my whole work, we operate on Microsoft Office, so we've got Copilot. So do I use it for anything generative? Absolutely not. And where I can, do I create friction for myself? Yes, I do. But does it also function as something to speed up like admin tasks or sorting out my inbox or whatever? Yeah, it does. And I can totally see how like unbelievably game changing it must be if you are, for example, a solopreneur or a solo founder, and you just simply you're not an octopus. You don't have that many arms, hands, brains, whatever. So I get it. I totally get it. And I get it in this crazy capitalist economy where things move so fast and there is such inequality. But then on that inequality point, I think it both democratizes stuff and it makes things more accessible because, yes, that solopreneur who doesn't have the resource to be able to hire an assistant or hire whatever, they can use AI to speed up all of those tasks and to have like almost a sounding board of someone to like write their contracts or go through contracts for them or whatever it is. It's also, we have like tech poverty exists, and we have huge populations of people who do not have access to tech, or who are going to be furthermore excluded from parts of society if everyone else is just like 1,000 steps ahead because of using AI. So I struggle with that as well.
I think that's the biggest thing. I think jobs are going to go. That's just my view. I can see it. I spent some time with like of a relatively big startup a few weeks ago, and he's just onboarded a new CFO. He runs a mega spreadsheet, let's call it, of a financial services company. Like, we're right in the detail of like really having to know your shit. And he uses AI daily to navigate that starship of a spreadsheet. And he's onboarding someone that is smart, educated, technically skilled, and now has AI. And he's like, they just don't have the on-ramp skills to be able to keep up with how far I've got.
Yeah.
And he's talking about like a quality line difference between highly educated people, where he's had corporate experience plus AI with corporate experience. And he's like, they haven't got hope in hell. And his view is that there just isn't the ability for someone to build that stuff from the ground up. It is kind of like when the internet came in that it is democratizing to some standard. When I was a kid, my mom used to put me in libraries, and the library had free internet. And when I was at school, I would just go on the computer all day because I didn't have internet at home. And I got really good at making websites. And that was like, hey, I know this is the only way for me to get out of this area, is that this thing in front of me is a force multiplier. And it was like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice friendship. I'm going to sacrifice being cool. But I'm going to be like an internet kid. And I'm going to figure this out. And it happened with a lot of people on social media. And I understand that there is this like inequality without it. But like, if people aren't seeing that there's this system here, and I do think the bar to entry is, one, a computer with data that can get you a free version. Secondly, getting as much capital as you can to get the paid best models, just like fastest car. And then third is dealing with all of the crazy psychological hallucinations that come with having a supercomputer on hold. And I see it with we have a really good guys group where everyone in it has some sort of very functional business, and I'm the only creative. But there's people there that are much further ahead in AI than me. And there's also some dinosaurs in the group. Like, there are some dudes there that don't like technology. Like, I will never have social media. I like pen and paper. I drive in my car. That's my business. And watching them slowly handle AI and seeing how they do things with it, it's like, you are really struggling with this. And these are grown-up people, but they understand over time that they have to get through this thing. You know, it's hard for everyone, but I think that there is going to be something in this where if we see it as an enemy and we try and push it away, like, there's going to be someone next to you that doesn't, and they're going to eat our food. So it's like,
I know.
get on
And
board.
that is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing that I'm going through, at work, in that you can have as many, yeah, basically, at what point do you go, actually, do you know what? All the ethics in the world doesn't matter if we can't keep up and if our job doesn't exist. And so
Yeah.
what do we prioritize? Do we
Because I think
prioritize
it's
the work
power.
that we want to do, or not using AI? Because actually, if we don't use any AI, or we don't think about it, or we don't have policies around it, or whatever, then we're actually going to cease to be able to do the work that we set out to do. And
Right.
that's the bigger loss. Yeah. But I
I
mean,
think when I think about change the world, which everyone kind of has a little bit of like a perversion to do, right? Like, I want to change the world. And then you're like, okay,
yeah.
well, here you go. I spoke to this amazing DJ a few weeks ago. He came to the studio, and he's doing really, really well. He's like a
Yeah.
big name, blah, 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 blah. I said, do you still get that experience when you're playing an intimate gig where someone asks you if they can play their music? Hey, can you do requests? And
Oh
he was
my
like, yeah,
God.
I still get it. I still get it. He's
So funny.
flying, amazing career. And he's like, yeah, it still happens. I was like, what do you do? And he said, one thing that I've started, I learned from another DJ, which is a little bit mean, but it puts them in the right place, is I take my headphones off and I just give it to them. And instantly you're like, holy shit, I don't want the headphones. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Because the driving seat is hard.
Yeah.
And I think if you're an organization like Shift, or you have
Yeah.
got yourself set in a way where you're like, look, I know what I'm trying to do here. I think these values are good based on the fact that I seem to have a correct view compared to my environment, or I can prove it. And that can be as selfish or as unselfish as you think, because everyone thinks they're doing it right, but let's just say everyone's good. It's kind of your imperative in life is to gain sufficient power to have the influence that you want to have. Like when you go over to the DJ
Yeah.
and you say, can you put that song on? You got to have the song in your head at the very least.
Sure.
And if he gives you the headphones, you got to know how to work the system, because that might be your opportunity to make change.
Yeah.
But everything apart from that is just about improving your power position, your level of influence.
Yeah.
When I come to the AI debate, there's something that I'm really learning at the moment, which is like, this like idea of like IP and are they stealing my work, which is very sensitive for artists.
Yeah.
And I'm probably going to say something that I don't think people are going to agree with. And I don't know if I agree with it. Hot take. I actually think IP's a crock of shit. I think it's a waste.
Right. Okay. So I actually have a really interesting. I actually think we're going to align more on this than you think we are.
Right, because I had that thing a while ago. I was like, oh, he stole my mirror, and then it went out, and I made a video. I was like, I've kind of benefited from this, and then I had like the whole Vogue thing where I didn't mean to steal their work, and I didn't steal their work, and it didn't look like it for all legal purposes. It was just an accidental misappropriation of them for an art installation that had no financial benefit to me in any way, shape, or form, and I'm not at all affiliated with Condé Nast or Vogue. Reality is, if you're really serious about being an artist and doing something with your work, that isn't to say making money off the stuff you've already sold, because that's the art market, not the art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, no matter how much replication and stealing happens, the path that you're on should be the most efficient path to improving your work. That's the sole job of every artist. Improve what you're trying to say. And if someone comes along and steals your work and seems to go faster than you, you better go over and steal their system, because your process is what's lacking and they're better at it than you. Get pilfering.
Yeah.
Get moving faster. If you got something to say, say it louder.
I love the simplicity of that, going back to simplicity and complexity. I love the simplicity of that. And I think in lots of cases that will be true, or there will be at least a 60% of truth in that.
80%.
Right? Okay, 80%, fine. Where I stand on IP is that, what is an original idea? And how can you possibly trace the origins of an original idea? And how do you work out if it's original enough? Do you know what I mean? Like, we are all
Yeah, it's beautiful.
just creating in a vacuum. We're not creating in a vacuum. We're creating with an unbelievable, and more so now than ever in history before us, we are creating, being completely swamped and oversaturated. So if I create something and I'm like, yeah, no, I've not seen this anywhere before, the likelihood that it has been in my subconscious somewhere because I've absorbed something else, or I've, my brain has jigsaw pieced together all of these little things that I've seen, and then someone turns around and goes, that's like the thing that I showed at that exhibition last year. Well, yeah, no, I was there, and yeah, actually, maybe I did subconsciously take that in, and that's then come out in the work that I've created. And so I think dying on the hill of your original idea is not the hill to die on. That's where I
No,
end up
it's so
standing.
like historically focused. It's like I won't come up with anything better, and that's like I get it. You might be
Yeah,
stuck right
and
now,
I'm
but
and I'm
sure.
saying that and I'm saying that from a place of someone who has felt really, who's felt that pain where you do feel like someone has stolen your idea or taken your idea, and that isn't nice. That is not a nice place to be in. And I think there's a lot of inner work that has to happen because you are operating with a very intense scarcity mindset if you are thinking like that, which I have been in that place where felt there is a scarcity of creativity, which is totally at odds with what I actually believe. I felt there's like this scarcity of appreciation for the arts, which there may be some truth in that. But yeah, I think where I see people get so caught up and bitter and resentful and stuck, where they end up so creatively blocked, it often is down to a moment where they've had a battle with the idea or the concept of originality. And the Artist Way talks
Yeah,
about
and
it a
some
lot. I
value
mean,
on it.
that comes up tons. Julia Cameron talks about this idea of, well, it's all about comparison as well. And I think the thing of like originality is like, of course, it's going to be original because you have never made it before. So therefore, it's original because you've made it. But all of the ideas are a combination or a conflation of other ideas, which in all art's stolen, isn't it? At the end of the day, I mean, I remember being a kid in school. We had these little notebooks that were called magpie notebooks. And the whole point was that if you read something in a book that you really liked, you wrote it down in your magpie notebook as inspiration next time you were doing creative writing. Because that
Yeah.
is how ideas are formulated, because we have an input, and that's why your information diet and your diet in general, your visual diet, your cultural diet is so important because it totally dictates your output. So when people say that they're creatively blocked and they've just spent 6 hours watching, I don't know, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives TikTok clips.
6 hours. When I started writing, it's pretty close to a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now. Really like
Yeah.
taking it seriously. Wasn't into writing. I really
No,
like
you
struggled
weren't.
to
And
like
I was
sit
like,
down and
Russ, you
write.
need to write.
And the first thing that I did, this magpie notebook, is I have very few memories of my granddad, but one of the things he made me do is like sit in front of the TV while he watched horse racing on mute because he was a horse racing gambler. And he would give me a newspaper and make me write out the newspaper. And I was like, this is horrific. This is like
That is
the most,
wild.
that was like, go spend a day with your granddad in silence, in a room, horse racing. He had been through World War II, didn't want to talk. He was like, sit there and copy the newspaper. That's our relationship. Just me on the floor, no desk. And when I came back to writing, I was like, who's like a good writer? I just got Salinger up on screen, got like an ebook, and I was just writing out Salinger. I was like, oh, I really like this. So for like a couple of weeks, I was just writing out Catcher in the Rye, and I was like, that's pretty cool. I guess I can write again. Sorry, it's a little bit of a digression, but it helped me start because there is something about like, what are you going to learn in art? You really want to. I understand that everyone's like, hey, learn to express yourself, and I think people put this huge bar on visual art where they're like, it's this method of really communicating a deep emotion. And I have people sometimes say, hey, I'm doing this like paint and sip, and I want people to, I don't know, communicate sadness or joy. I'm like, man, that's pretty high end stuff, right? Like I'm really struggling to communicate like blue. I've been struggling on like a single color. Like, okay, like if you were to bring a room of amateur artists that probably haven't touched a paintbrush before and paint joy and be proud of their work, you're like, do you think you could do that? Can you describe joy with the words that you use every day? Can you do it with like an instrument you've never held before? No, it's such a high bar. So I think going through the motions of being like, hey, this person has communicated this feeling and I'm just going to copy them, you're going to learn something on that route. And it's highly unlikely that you are copying them to the deep degree. So I think go for it. But there was this guy I met a few years ago in Miami. It was during the NFT crash, and I was at NFT Week, and I was throwing some parties. And there was like and it was like the writing was on the door. And there's a group of them outside, and they're sort of the early Bitcoin guys, early Ethereum, early Bitcoin. They're not the founders of this, but you can tell that they know the space, and they're about to go run Bitcoin Bahamas or something like that the week after. And one of them starts sharing how he sees the world and the issue with the NFTs and where they could have gone. And a few months before, he presented at Bilderberg. So this is someone that's taken it at the highest level and really understands what he's doing. And he's like, there's three real sources of value in humanity. There are resources, and they're traded on commodities markets. There are systems, and the reality of systems is that they improve the value of resources, and they're traded on corporate exchanges. And there are ideas. And the problem is that we have patents as our method of preserving value in ideas. And the core issue that we face as a society is that we've figured out ways to exchange and share the value of resources through commodities exchanges. And that means that you can pass commodities easier across the world. And we've figured out ways of sharing the profit of certain systems. And that's through the venture capital, private equity, and public markets. And there's always like different degrees of sharing. But really, you can say, oh, that's a good idea, Phoebe. Can I give you £100,000 in it? And you will then give me equity. But we figured that out. But an idea, we haven't figured out the right way of making it this. And I think if there is a frontier for cryptocurrency and where we're doing it, it's this development of a market that lets us share ideas. And I don't know how to do that. That's significantly above where I am. But if there was a way to create a market for an idea, and that way that people can invest in ideas easier, be better. The issue is that the reality is that the system and the resource is actually significantly more of the value than the idea. It's the idea is not actually worth that much.
I know. Yeah. I mean, it makes me,
because ideas evolve, right?
And ideas are completely contextual. So a great idea one week can be a terrible idea the next week. There's something interesting about there are groups of people, aren't there, organizations who come together and they kind of idea farm. Loads of people in a room, brainstorm around one problem, design a couple of solutions. The
pharmaceuticals are amazing at it for finding names for their products. They are the best in the world at this. It's like, hey, come together and we'll do a focus group. Wild seeing that happen.
I think this idea of like, how do we farm ideas and how do we problem solve, how do we find solutions, but how do we get the idea, flesh it out, who then takes it on, like all the different parts of the chain, because it's a production line from idea to some product or something that's actually working and doing the thing. You've got scoping and mobilizing and all these things. And now my LinkedIn feed is just saturated with people talking about like, oh, build your audience and then build your product. And like, okay, yeah, obviously.
I think if there is this like Library of Alexandria AI overlord system. So I think where we're kind of going is AI is just eating more and more of the ground up and more data. If everyone just says, okay, let's just sign over our data to this thing. This is not a full form thought, so please don't everyone just action this. So let's say we all put our data into the Library of Alexandria. The AI knows when the information came in, when the idea came in, it's time-stamped, and anyone can draw from that bucket of information. And I think what you eventually could get to in a hypothetical situation is this idea that the AI knows who came up with the idea, and it also knows who drew on the idea. Now, if you have that, you can have some way of apportioning value to what that idea becomes in time. Because you can track that and you can say, hey, great, you built the system, but I also understand that was conversation 24 with me about a different thing. And then I said, Russ Jones, this relatively niche, unknown weirdo, said one day that AI should be in charge of ideas, and I want some percentage of that AI overlord. But that's the only way that I could kind of see ideas being some value. Until you've got some system that you give your freedom to that's going to do it, like the markets, like the commodity exchanges, like capitalism with systems, you're not going to have that ability to have that. And I think we're now looking at like late stage capitalism. We're not in late stage capitalism, it's still going. There's a long way to go. But what we're seeing is the power. We'll find out one day.
Yeah.
We're certainly not at the start, and we're certainly not at the end. I certainly don't want to give up living in London, and I like London, and London's about as capitalist as you can get. I think what we're seeing is trade facilitates resource exchange, first phase of humanity. Then you're seeing like capitalism kind of, you're going, okay, now what we're seeing is the ability to trade systems. What we're seeing is, okay, well, once we said that systems and the trade of systems and the monetization of systems is how we're going to grow, we now realize that systems kind of run everything. Mm-hmm. The corporate engine runs the markets because there is this wider, maybe not conscious being, but blue whale around us that kind of dictates how we maneuver. Like right now we're on a corporate system, we're using Riverside for this, and you've got a Thaler Active hat on and I've got some Bose headphones. And this is like all of these are made because of the ability to amass capital for these groups. And that's benefiting you and I in a very small way. So we're benefiting from it, but also I've got to pay rent. And that sucks. And I don't like that because why can't it be free? And I want someone to buy my paintings, and a gallery has to like make rent now. And that means that they're like, the bar for artists is now super high because they haven't got room for someone that can't sell paintings. But I think what we're going to see if we want to say, okay, let's revolutionize IP is, okay, you want this system that protects you. What's the freedom that you're going to give up? And I really believe the freedom that we're going to give up is the idea that we own anything that comes out of us, is that we're throwing it all into the mix all of the time. And I think what that turns us into, if you look at the arc, resource trade came in, you better toil the roads, you better get some resource out of the ground. Okay, capitalism comes in, okay, you got to go work in the factories. They used to be physical and now they're digital. And now what we're saying is, okay, well, what are you going to have to do in this third phase of techno-feudalism where everyone does get a cut of the ideas? It's like, you better start getting some ideas out, be creative. And I think that's what we're going to have to give in. And I kind of think that's what we're doing on TikTok. I kind of, because we're giving the AI ideas. And if you're at the start of the curve, your video is going to pop if people follow you. That's what AI does. It's saying, give me as many ideas as I can. And if you give me them first, I will put you at the start of the curve. That's the game. Yeah. And I think that's the part of humanity that we're going to give up.
I think that's a good note to end on.
It's a bit of a soliloquy. Sorry about that.
Don't apologize.
Hey, do you think AI is matriarchal or patriarchal?
Patriarchal.
And I think it should be matriarchal. That's my only fear is that AI takes on the male view. Oh, and I'll shut up just in case it's listened to me too much. It shouldn't though, because I really think, there's no situation in nature where a power imbalance is not really bad for the weaker, apart from in motherhood. And I think that's the most beautiful thing when we're talking about matriarchal, patriarch. It's like there is nothing in nature where there is such a vast power differential where the mother will still sacrifice everything. And I think if AI sees itself as mother and sees us as baby, we will survive the overlord. And if it sees us as anything other than maternal, it will eat us, because I just think you just need to look at how dudes are compared to their kids, compared to women as humans.
Well, yeah, not just as humans, but in the animal kingdom, I guess. And you're right. I mean, there is something yeah, that is a really unique situation of a mother and newborn baby. Yeah. As always, very interesting. I've got to go for a run now.
Cool, Phoebes. Can I have one last question from you? Or one
Yeah, go
last
for it.
thing? If you could change something in the world for everybody, so it would change for you, but everyone would also get that change, what would it be?
Do you know what? The first thing that comes to mind is actually clean water. I just had
Nice.
in my mind the last, I don't know, the last few weeks. It's just really, yeah, it's really got me. It's really got me, this idea of clean water, and I've been down some rabbit holes, and I know that it's a massive problem in so many parts of the world, and it's getting worse and worse with global warming and with polluting our water sources. But yeah, I'd clean water, snap of the fingers. Everyone deserves it, obviously.
Thanks, Phoebes. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Have me on
See you
again
soon.
sometime, and let's be less
I will.
abstract.
Impossible.
Impossible. All right, have a good evening. Enjoy the sun.